And because life is a never-ending Ouroboros, I am now trying to get caught up on commissioned reviews again. Someday I will. Someday. So this time I was commissioned to take a look at Mobile Suit Gundam, specifically the first compilation movie. So for anyone who doesn't already know what this is, I should probably give a little bit of context. Mobile Suit Gundam was an anime series that aired in Japan in 1979 and 1980, and it didn't do great. It wasn't a total bomb, but it was canceled. It didn't last particularly long. And in an effort to try and get more money out of all the work that had gone into it, a number of episodes were recut and reassembled into 3 films. And as they went along, it did actually involve more and more new additions to it to make sure that the story worked, or to improve some things that were considered to be things that didn't quite work as intended previously. So what I am looking at is Mobile Suit Gundam, the first compilation movie. And it has been a long time since I have watched anime from the 80s. Wow, I mean, late 70s technically, but like there's just kind of a vibe to 70s and 80s anime. It's hard to explain. I mean, for one thing, they have a very specific sort of soundscape. Like, I could be in a room with a 1980s or late 70s anime playing, not look at the screen, not hear any dialogue to know that it's Japanese, and just the soundscape of it, I'd be like, that's anime. And that's 80s anime. It just sounds a certain way. Things like this, Castle of Cagliostro, Vampire Hunter D, they sound similar. I don't know enough about sound to nail down exactly what it is, but there's things like that. And while this is reassembled into a movie, it's very much TV grade animation. And while I enjoy anime, I generally stick to anime films more than anime series, largely just out of time. A lot of anime series are really freaking long. And even the ones that aren't, I've been frustrated by a few too many. Like there's honestly only one anime series that I consider that I love, and even that one I haven't revisited in a while, and I'm afraid to. And that's Escaflowne. But other ones I've seen, even the ones I've seen all the way through, like Cowboy Bebop, Hellsing, Full Metal Alchemist, like I've enjoyed but not fallen in love with. So I tend to stick with anime films. I have a better track record with those, at least in terms of finding ones that I really like. So this was an interesting experience for me. The funny thing is, it's kind of hard for me to judge and review like just as a movie, because first of all, it's not really a movie. I will say this. They did a surprisingly impressive job at hiding the seams of where one episode wraps up and another begins. Now, that's not to say that there aren't telltale signs, like the fact that there isn't like an overall story arc with, building to a great climax. It's a bunch of little mini climaxes, as you'd expect from individual episodes. But I couldn't really clearly find the point at which, okay, that was definitely the point of another episode. This was definitely the start of another one. I think I only spotted that maybe once. It was pretty well cut together, all things considered. So that was kind of cool. Another thing that was interesting, like as someone who doesn't do animation, I can't draw, but who loves animation, it's interesting for me to go back to a period in time where so many of the tropes, specifically visual, of anime and anime storytelling were being done here, but not simply because they were tropes and that's just how anime is done, because that's how it had to be done. What I mean by that is like the pacing of it is way slower than you'd ever get from an American cartoon, especially an American cartoon from the same time period. But a lot of that is out of necessity because you need to stretch what you've got. You can't animate everything. So the slow pans that set scenes, the long shots that just hold for a while, the zoom ins on characters' reactions and just holding it while the face is not completely static, but it's just kind of, and like it's just a very small, easy to do loop of like, and just the vocalization. All these things are in there at this point in time because they don't have the money to do it another way. And it's funny for me to see that now from something back when they literally needed to do it this way because they couldn't afford to animate it more fully than this. But also to know that like these things became staples of anime even after the points where they didn't have to do it that way anymore. So it's one of those things that like it's fun to watch and soak in because it's like, yeah, that's right. Like these things that are kind of staples of the visual language of anime, they exist for reasons. And I feel like going back to older work, you sort of get a better appreciation of why a lot of this stuff is the way that it is. That said, this is a much more serious anime. It lacks a lot of the more extreme, over the top, fantastical, or excessively humorous moments that you would expect out of anime TV series. It's played very straight, very somberly, in fact. I just realized that I haven't actually said what the heck this thing is in terms of story. So it's set in the future. Humans have started traveling out into space. There are, colonies and ships with people on them and all this sort of stuff. And there's basically been a war going on between an independence movement and the Earth Federation. And we're sort of picking up at the breaking of a stalemate. And as both sides develop new weapons called mobile suits, which are giant robot suits. I mean, if you're my age, they're kind of equivalent to, your Voltrons, your Zords from Power Rangers, that kind of thing. It's a giant robot suit that a human controls. Those are the new weapons. So we focus on a group of young people thrust by circumstance into combat, and with a big focus on Amuro, I'm probably butchering this pronunciation, who is a young man who finds himself piloting the latest mobile suit. And it's interesting because a more standard or more kid-focused version of this would be that he and other kids who he's totally already friends with, like in a pinch, they take arms against the bad guys and they're so good, like that they're just brought on board. And like, he is good, but a lot of it's out of necessity. The group that he's with, these people on this other ship, they need him. They are out of soldiers. They are out of pilots. Everybody's dead. So anyone who can use this stuff, even if they're not properly trained, get in and start using it. And more impressively, it doesn't just play that off lightly. So like when I mentioned sort of the general somber tone of the thing, for one, Amuro is really damaged, like psychologically, by what he has to do. After the first time he defeats another mobile suit, i.e. blows it up, and the other pilot dies, he's in shock. You can tell. But he's put back out in the field, not because nobody cares, but because they don't have time for him to get proper treatment and recover. There's too much going on. And it's interesting to watch something that feels in many ways like it's a story that could have been for, it could have been very kiddie, could have been very family audience, but instead it's taking these things and going like, no, this is really bad for him. The fact that he is doing this and he doesn't get to stop because everything going on, the world won't stop and let him process what it is that's going on in his life. And that was one thing. Another thing that really I was impressed by was how well we get to know the villains. And by that, I don't just mean the main villains, though I'll come back to some of them in a little bit. But I mean like just the pilot of the other mech suits, or the pilots of these, jet planes and all this other stuff. We see them. We watch them have dialogue. We get to see them the same way we see the people who we're meant to be rooting for. They're framed the same way. They get the same kind of moments. They're shown to be people. Because the easy thing to do when you're dealing with people piloting giant mechs or planes or whatever is like you just don't really show or humanize the pilots of these other things. I mean, there is a reason that in Star Wars, whenever they cut to inside a TIE fighter, like the people piloting it have fully face obscuring helmets, whereas all the pilots on the Rebel side just have these little blast shield things, but you can see their eyes and face and they're totally humanized. Like, there's a reason you do it like that. And Mobile Suit Gundam doesn't. It shows you that these are people. And when they're afraid, it shows you that. There's even later on a character who says flat out, after Amuro starts shooting at some soldiers, he says, they have children. What are you doing? And that could have felt like a really cheap moment. Like, oh, you're just going to mention this now just for the sake of having said it? No, that was actually really in keeping with the way that all forces involved in this have been portrayed and have been framed. So it was more of a reminder of what the thing was already showing us as opposed to a token acknowledgement, which is what I would have expected it to land like. And so I mentioned some of the other villains. Okay. I did check a little online, and I'm not the only person who's reading a bit of a thing between Char and Garma. Like, those two guys, they're more than friends. I'm thoroughly convinced of that. Well, I mean, there's stuff that goes on later that brings that into question. But I mean, like, in terms of closeness, friend would be an inadequate descriptor. That's what I'm going with. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. But again, there's like a lot of humanizing of everybody on all sides. The low-level grunts, the commanders, and the villains, even like the main recurring villain, Char, he is shown to be thoughtful and tactical, and he's not wasteful of his resources. He's not shouting at people for disobeying orders. He's not like, I'll kill you if you don't get back out there. Like, no, he does strategic retreats. He seems to care about the people under his command. The times that his actions don't line up with that, there are very specific reasons for it. It's just given more thought and way fewer broad strokes than I would have expected from a series, anime or otherwise, that came out at the time this came out. It's pretty impressive that way. As impressed as I am by the depth of characterization and the breadth of it, how many people get properly characterized, I'm not super in love with a lot of these characters. I mean, Char's probably the most compelling at this point. And while I appreciate what they're doing with Amuro, I'm not super compelled by him. And then most of the others, they're fine. They fit fairly standard molds. Young and energetic, indecisive leader, the coward. It's fairly box checky, and the dialogue isn't great. Granted, part of that could be a translation, but I don't think it really is, because all right, let me put it this way. I don't know Japanese, like, at all. But just after watching this, and I know for a fact that in Japanese saying what, like as a question, what is nani? I know that for a fact because they do it so freaking much. Somebody says something and somebody goes, nani? And obviously the subtitles are, what? And well, in other words, let's reiterate, say it again. I know partially it's a way to stretch for time without having to do the big animation explosion kind of stuff, but it's not great as far as actual dialogue goes. Like, the characterization of these people is well delivered in terms of what it's in terms of what the characters are that are being brought across. The way that it does it is functional. Let's just go with that. And as far as the animation quality, again, this is TV. It's not actual movie budget. So, and for TV, the explosions, the action scenes, they're decent. I'd say there's a little too many of them. The thing's about 2.5 hours long. In an ideal world, I'd say shave about 10, 15 minutes off of it and probably off of some action scenes. But again, I think that it is one of the signs that is a holdover from the fact that it's a number of episodes stitched together. And, the action scenes are the big selling points of an episode. There's probably a big action scene in every episode. So, you put it up on screen. It's your best looking stuff. So I get it. But, it's fine. I think I'm more impressed with this as an artifact of the time, and that it is grander and with more depth and more thought than I would have expected from something at the time that this was made. I think if I were watching this as a brand new thing now, I wouldn't be nearly as impressed. But knowing when it was made, yeah, that's dang solid. Mobile Suit Gundam, first movie. You've seen it. What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the topics. Let us talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. Patreon is how you can commission me to eventually, someday, get around to reviewing something. I'm trying to get better. I really am. But not too much to worry about that. Because you know what? I try and take a relaxed attitude around here. So you can just come on back next time you need a break. It's the end credits. Means I gotta shout out some patrons. This month, it is Turok, Oliver B., Linda Walters, TT, Robin Powell, Fernobulax, The Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Dharma Michael Doyle, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Casperl, Adam Lefty Taylor, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Bookworm. Thanks so much for your support.